Welcome back to Yehoshua's Daf Yomi Shiur, where the Daf continues daily until the complete revelation of Mashiach ben David, which is Messiah, the son of David. Today we'll be looking at Tractate Chullin, page 70, starting with 70a, top of the page, with the words V'i itmar baha. V'i itmar baha, beha ka'amar rabba, aval beha ema modile, v'rav huna tzricho. And if their dispute was stated only with regard to that case, when 1/3 emerged through the wall of the womb, one might have thought it is only in that case that Rabbah says the animal is consecrated from that point forward, as that results in astringency, meaning the fetus is subject to firstborn status. But in this case, when after 1/3 emerged, it was sold to a Gentile, and where ruling that the animal is consecrated from that point forward results in a leniency, one might say that Rabbah concedes to Rav Huna. Therefore, it was necessary for the dispute to be stated in both cases. Tanan Hamevakeres Hamakasheleled Mechatech Ever Mashlich Kol HaKrovim Mailav Mechatech Umeniach V'im amat imafreya hu kadosh yikaver miboyelei. The Gemara raises a difficulty with the opinion of Rav Huna. We learned in the Mishnah, if an animal that was giving birth to a firstborn male was encountering difficulty giving birth, and in order to alleviate the difficulty one wishes to terminate the birth, he may cut up the fetus limb by limb and cast it to the dogs. What, is it not teaching that one cuts each limb and leaves it outside the body, casting the limbs to the dogs only after he has already extracted a majority of its body? And if you say a firstborn is consecrated retroactively, then once the majority of the fetus emerges from the womb, all the limbs would be consecrated retroactively according to Rav Huna. Accordingly, the Mishnah should have said the limbs must be buried. Lo. The Gemara responds, no, here we are dealing with one who cuts each limb and immediately casts it to the dogs before any consecration takes effect. Yatzaru bo yikavel v'nitrefo min bechoiro diflog u'lisnei b'didei b'med v'on amurim v'mechatech u'mashlich ever aval mechatech u'meniach yikavel. The Gemara asks, but according to this, if one cuts the limbs and leaves them, what is the halachim? Each one must be buried. If that is so, rather than teaching in the latter clause of the Mishnah, if a majority of the fetus had already emerged, it is considered to have been born and duly consecrated. And so, if one cut it up, it must be buried. And any future offspring from that animal is exempted from firstborn status. Let the Tana instead distinguish and teach a case in which the limbs are consecrated within the context of the first case itself, in the following manner. In what case is this statement that the limbs may be cast to the dogs said? It is with regard to one who cuts pieces of the fetus and immediately casts them to the dogs, limb by limb, before a majority has emerged. But if one cuts and leaves the limbs until a majority has emerged, each one of them must be buried. The Gemara answers, that is indeed what the latter clause of the Mishnah is saying. In what case is this statement said? It is with regard to one who cuts and casts the limbs to the dogs before a majority emerges. But if one cuts and leaves the limbs until a majority emerges, it is regarded as though a majority of it emerged at one time, and so it must be buried. Boi Rava, halchu beivarin, achar harov, boi lo halchu beivarin achar harov. Rava raises a dilemma. Does one follow the majority with regard to limbs, or does one not follow the majority with regard to limbs? Echidami, ilema kegoin shiatzeroi v'miut eiver, v'komi boile, hai miut divarai, basaroi v'devar shadinon, le, v'basaruba deubar shadinon le. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances of this dilemma? What exactly is Rava's question? If we say it's referring to a case where the majority of the fetus emerged, but that the majority includes the emergence of the minority part of one of its limbs, then Rava is raising the following dilemma. With regard to this minority part of a limb that is outside the womb, do we cast it, meaning count it, together with the majority of that limb, which is still inside the womb, as if the entire limb was still inside the womb? If so, it would be regarded as though a majority of the fetus has not yet emerged, or perhaps we cast it and count it together with the majority of the fetus that has already emerged, and so it is regarded as though a majority of the fetus has emerged, and it is duly consecrated. Pshita delo shivakinan uruba deubar azlinan basaroi vever. The Gemara rejects this possibility. In that case, it is obvious that we do not disregard the majority of the fetus and go after the majority of the limb. Consequently, Rava would not have raised a dilemma about this. Berov Ever become a boile hakumiut de gavai mahu lemishday basaroi vever. Rather, the dilemma is referring to a case where half of the fetus emerged, but that half includes the majority of a certain limb. And Rava raises the following dilemma with regard to this majority part of a limb that is inside the womb. What is the halacha as to whether one casts it and counts it together with the majority of that limb, and considers it as if that entire limb has emerged? If it is counted, it would be regarded as though a majority of the fetus has emerged, and it is duly consecrated. Tashima, Yatsa Ruboi, Hare Ze Yikover, My Ruboi Ilema Ruboi Mamish, Ad Hashtelo Ashmeinan, the Ruboi Kikuloi. The Gemara suggests coming here a resolution from a statement of the Mishnah. If the majority of the fetus had already emerged, it is considered to have been born and duly consecrated, and so if one cut it up, it must be buried. The Gemara clarifies what is meant by a majority of the fetus. If we say it means literally the majority of the fetus, then the following difficulty arises. Until now, had we not learned the principle that a majority of an item is considered like all of it, this is a well-established principle, and it is not necessary to teach it again in this context. Rather, is the Mishnah not referring to a case where half of the fetus emerged, but that half includes a majority of a limb? If so, the Mishnah directly resolves Rava's dilemma and teaches that the majority part of the limb inside the womb is regarded as though it had emerged. Lo, kingon shiatza ruba memiot ever, ukamash milan delo shivakinan ruba diubar behema. The Gemara responds, no, the Mishnah could be referring to a case where the majority of the fetus had emerged, but that majority includes the emergence of the minority of a limb, and it teaches us that we do not disregard the majority of the fetus and go after the majority of the limb. By Rava Karacho Vasiv Mahu Betaliso Mahu. If a firstborn animal is consecrated by virtue of the fact that at its birth is the first in which the womb of the mother opens, as indicated by the verse, consecrate to me every firstborn, that which opens the womb, Exodus 13:2. Concerning this condition, Rava raises a dilemma. If one wrapped the fetus in the bast of a palm tree while it was still in the womb, and therefore it did not come in contact with the opening of the womb directly when it emerged, what is the halacha with regard to whether it is consecrated? Likewise, if one wrapped it in his robe when it emerged, what is the halacha? B'shili yaso mahu, b'shili yaso, arachehu el b'shili acheres mahu. Rava adds, if it emerged wrapped in its afterbirth, what's the halacha? The Gemara interjects, how could one suggest that being wrapped in its afterbirth would pose a problem? That is a normal manner of birth, and the afterbirth is consequently not considered an imposition. Accordingly, it is considered as though it was in direct contact with the opening of the womb. Rather, Rava's dilemma must be as follows. If it emerged wrapped in the afterbirth of a different animal, how could that be? That's strange. How is that possible? How could it be wrapped in the afterbirth of a different animal? That makes zero sense. Okay, another dilemma. If one wrapped it in one's hands and held it and brought it out in that fashion, such that the fetus did not come in direct contact with the opening of the womb, what's the halacha? With regard to all of these dilemmas, the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances if the fetus had already partially emerged head first, and then one wrapped the body, which was still inside the womb? The halacha in such a case is clear. Since it had emerged, it is already considered to have been born and to have opened up the womb. It is duly consecrated. Rather, the dilemma is in a case where it partially emerged the hind legs first, and the majority of the body, which was still in the womb, was wrapped before it emerged. Rava raises additional dilemmas. If a weasel entered the womb and swallowed the fetus there, and then exited the womb, bringing the fetus out in its stomach, what's the halacha? Not possible. Physically not possible. Okay, what if it happened? Okay, the Gemara interjects, is there any doubt about a case where a weasel brought the fetus out in its stomach? In such a case, it is the weasel that brought it out, and it is certainly not regarded as though the fetus opened the womb. Rather, the dilemma concerns a case where the weasel swallowed the fetus and brought it out, and then brought it back into the womb and vomited it out while inside the womb, and the fetus subsequently emerged of its own accord. What's the halacha in this case? Here, big rachamim. Mahu didei pater, the lav didei lo pater, oidilma, the lav didei nami pater teku. Another dilemma. If one pressed together the openings of two wombs of two animals giving birth to firstborns, and a fetus exited from the womb of this animal, entered the womb of that animal, and then emerged from the womb of the second animal, after which the second animal gave birth to its fetus, what is the halacha with regard to whether the fetus of the second animal is consecrated as a firstborn? Is the womb considered to have opened only when its own fetus emerges from inside, but a fetus that is not its own is not halakhically considered to have opened the womb? Or perhaps even a fetus that is not its own is also considered to have opened the womb? The Gemara does not provide a resolution for these dilemmas and concludes, Teku. The dilemma shall stand unresolved until the coming of Messiah, the son of David. Okay. Rav Acha raises one of the walls of the opening of the womb opened and widened to such an extent that when the fetus emerged it did not touch. Then what's the halacha? Does the airspace of the opening of the womb consecrate the fetus as it is born? And this situation exists here in this case, or perhaps it is the contact with the opening of the womb that consecrates it, and this situation does not exist here in this case. Boimar Baravashi nekru koisle beis harechem mahu nekru lesen bu ela nekru v'salu lei b'tzavorei mai במקומן מקדשי שלא במקומן ולא מקדשי או דילמה שלא במקומן nami מקדשי. Marber of Ashi raises a dilemma. If the walls of the opening of the womb were removed, what's the halacha? The Gemara interjects. The halacha in this case is clear. Since if they were removed, they are not there to consecrate the fetus. Rather, the dilemma is in a case where they were removed from their original place, recessed inside the womb, and as the fetus emerged, the walls lay on its neck. In such a case, what is the halacha? Do the walls of the opening of the womb consecrate a fetus only when they are in their natural place, but when they are not in their natural place, they cannot consecrate a fetus? Or perhaps, when they are not in their natural place, they also consecrate the fetus? My boymine Rav Yirmiyah Rabbi Zeiro nig mamu koisli beis harechem mahu amar lei konegad bebaya biboylan beboy Zeira dafilula boymine Rabbi Zeira mirabasi omed miruba al haparutz v'yatz derech parutz. Rabbi Yirmiyah raises a dilemma before Bezeira. If the walls of the opening of the womb were thinned by removing the inner layer, what is the halacha? If the fetus then emerges through them, is it consecrated? Bezeira said to him, you must have touched upon a dilemma that was already raised before us, and that discussion provides the answer to your dilemma. As Rabbi Zeira raised a dilemma, and some say that Rabbi Zeira raised that dilemma before Asi. If a section of the opening of the womb was cut away, but the standing section, meaning the part remaining, is greater in size than the breech removed section, and the offspring emerged through the breech section, or if the breech section is greater in size than the standing section, and the offspring emerged through the standing section, was halacha ad kan lo mi boyle. And a parutz miruban oimed ika oimed boilam aval nigmemo lo kashi lo komi boile. Rabbi Zeira explains how this is going to conclude the Amud here. Rabbi Zeira explains how this dilemma can resolve Rabbi Yirmiyah's dilemma. The dilemma was raised only with regard to a case where the breech section is greater than the standing section, and there is at least some part of the womb that's still standing, and therefore one can consider the possibility that it could consecrate the fetus. But a dilemma was not raised with regard to a case where the walls were thinned, because in that case it is obvious that the fetus is not consecrated, as there is nothing left to consecrate it. Finishing off the Talmud here and picking up with the new Mishnah on the top of 70b.